Today we want to break the idea that we don't need to get even. And you know the problem with mean people is that often they gain a measure of control over us. They live, there's a phrase out at the minute that's popular, living rent-free. Maybe you've been asked the question, what lives rent-free in your mind that you keep going back to? These mean people live rent-free and they gain a measure of control over us. They don't pay the bills. They don't give anything to us. All they do is take, and they just live rent-free in our head. And they control us. We're thinking about them. How would I respond? What are they doing at this moment? And they gain a measure of control over us. And because they have a measure of control, that can lead us to acting like them. When we're thinking about that person, we're like, I'm gonna do exactly what they do. I'm gonna give them left and right. Whatever they do to us, I'm going to do to them. So you act like them. But also it makes us act against them. So you're not just going to be mean, snide comments. You're actually going to go against them. Try and hurt that person. So because they have control over us, it leads us to act like them and act against them. Because you know this to be true. Mean people knock us off balance. We're just not ourselves. We don't think straight when we're around mean people. We just feel a bit off. We're not ourselves. And what do we do when we're off balance? We compensate. So if you're off balance and about to fall, you try and compensate. Or if you're flying off a road, you turn your car and you try and compensate over. But when we're off balance, we normally overcompensate. We try and do anything to get back into balance. Or when we're driving a car, we just turn the whole opposite way, and sometimes the car flips the other way. But when we compensate, it normally leads us to compromise. We'll do whatever it takes to get level thinking, to get back on balance, and it means we compromise on certain things, all to get equal. And I've got a great story to tell about mean people, and maybe you have your own story. But last week we heard about Pastor Jamie's landlord, his rude, mean landlord. And you can find it on last week's message on YouTube. If you want to hear a juicy story about a mean landlord, you can find it all on YouTube. But I've got a story today about a mean person sitting in the front row. No, don't worry, we're not. They're not in the front row. We're not going to talk about them. Today my story is about a mean car rental company. Anyone had the joy of renting a car? If you are in this room and you work for a car rental company, we love you. You're great. You're welcome here. But there was one particular brand in one particular airport at one particular time, and I'm going to tell you the story of this mean man. If someone can console Neve as well, because Neve is part of this story too, and you might have to hold her back, because I'm going to tell you this story. So we were on a trip, and we needed 3 rental cars. So there was a lot of people going on this trip, and it's hard to find drivers because you need a license and you need a credit card. So the amount of people that could drive was quite small. And I'm originally from Belfast, as you could probably tell by my accent. So I have a UK driver's license. I thought, I live in Ireland, I need to swap it over to an Irish one. So I gave the UK people, whoever needs it, my license in the hope that I would get an Irish one. And I gave it last October, thinking I'll get it soon. I still haven't got it. Update, still not here, still not arrived. So in January, I rented a car, and I was like, hey, what do I need? I don't have a license, but they were like, get this form, get this signed, do this, do that. So I did it, and in January, I was like, here's the forms, here's this, here's that. Brilliant, no problem. Got the keys, went off. So I thought, okay, different country, I'll phone them up beforehand, make sure that everything is okay. Hey, I've done this before a few months ago. I got this form, I've signed this, I've done that. Am I okay to drive? Yep, okay, no problem. Can you double check with your manager? That is okay. Yep, no problem. And this is definitely the right terminal I'm speaking to. Yep, no problem. Blah, blah, blah. So I thought, great. It's going to work the same as the first trip we did. So we get to this trip. We've all traveled. There's a big enough group for 3 cars. My pregnant wife is also on the trip. So we get to the car rental. First car, yep, no problem. Second car, yep, no problem. Third car, here's my form, here's the certificate, here's this. We don't take that. And I'm like, I phoned up last week, made sure I was talking to this branch, made sure to confirm with your manager, and you told me that if I got this and done that, we would be okay. We didn't tell you that. I'm like, okay, well, can you help us? Ready yourselves, okay? We say, is there anything you can do? He does this and says the words, next please. Oh, just let that sink in. Next, please. And I'm like, no, sorry, we haven't got the car yet, so are we able to sort something out? Can we get help? Can you do anything for us? Next, please. Oh. Anyone else's blood boiling right now? Anyone else want to find him and see where he is right now? So we were like, hey, is there anything we can do? And he's just like, phone the 24-hour helpline. They'll be able to help you, blah, 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 and just gets us rid and then can talk to the next customer. So we go to the side and ring this 24-hour helpline, which means it should be open 24 hours. So we phoned, and it was shut. Who closes a 24-hour helpline? So we're trying to get online, trying to go on this, and we can't get anything. So there's a gap in the queue. So we go over and be like, hey, weren't able to sort it out online. Are you able to help us? We need a car. I tried to play the pregnant card. I was like, my wife's here, she's heavily pregnant, all this here. And he said, next, please. Breathe. And at the end of the day, he did not help us. There is no goal. There's no, we lived happily ever after, and we got the car. What's going on in my head? I don't want to let you know. But my blood was boiling. Hey, you know this, there's nothing more mean than these 3 things. Someone talking at you, talking down on you. Why did you think you'd be able to get in with no license and this and that and the other? People looking past you. Next, please. And then people not listening to you. They're not listening. Hey, we tried this and we did that. And they didn't want anything to do with us. How mean is it that when people talk at you, they're looking past you and they're not listening to you? And what was my response? I was loving, caring, thoughtful, loving. In my head, I was like, I'm going to find that car. I'm going to key the car. I'm going to let out air from the tires. I'm going to rip up the paperwork. I'm going to do whatever it takes to get back at you. This was what was going on in my head. And maybe you've been in a situation like that where someone's just making your blood boil. And I'm sure many of us, as I was telling that story, and the person literally looked past me and said, next, please. I'm sure most of us in this room would love to just high-five him. Just give him a left and a right, just to make sure he knew how much anger we felt. So this guy was being rude to us. So what was our response going to be? We went to another company and had to get them out. And Adrian solved our problem. He solved all our issues. If you know Adrian, he will solve any problem that you have. We're going to put his phone number up. We're not going to do that. But he saved the day, and I wasn't allowed to drive because I was stupid enough to go to another country without a license, so they told me. But we'll move on because I'm hurt already. And you know this to be true. It's difficult not to be mean to mean people. In that circumstance, when he was being mean, it's so difficult not to be mean, to make a snarky comment, to try and get our own back, to match his rudeness with us. It's difficult not to be mean to mean people. And you know, it's also difficult to be kind to unkind people. How am I supposed to respond with kindness if this guy is sitting in front of me, talking at me, looking past me, and not wanting to help me at all. What am I supposed to do? So internally, I'm thinking, I'm going to use my get even standard, which is this. Do unto others as you've done unto you. So he's been rude to me, so what should I do? Be rude to him. So this is our get even standard. And this is what we normally think. When someone's mean to us, we should repay evil for evil because they deserve it. If they're mean to us, surely they deserve us being mean to them. But there's another way, and it's called Jesus' gold standard. It says this in Matthew 7, do unto others what you would have others do unto them. So how do I respond to someone that's being mean? Do I give him a car, which means then he's going to give me a car? Is that how it works? Sometimes when we respond with kindness, we still don't get kindness back. And it's so difficult to be kind to unkind people. But the problem with getting even is that it makes us like someone we dislike. When I was telling that story about the car rental guy, none of you were applauding him, saying, that is a great guy. I want my boss to meet him. My kids, you should be just like this guy. No one is saying that. We don't want to be like him. But if we got even, I would become someone like I dislike. And for us, that doesn't make sense. Why do we want to be someone that we dislike? So what do? Do we become a doormat? Do we let people just walk all over us? Do we become a pushover and let people push us out of the way? Do we go all Miley Cyrus on it and come in like a wrecking ball and just crash into everywhere? Do we become a bulldozer and just push people out of the way? So what do we do with mean people? The question I want to ask today is, how are we to treat those who mistreat us? And hopefully this will help you today, whether you're a Christ follower or not. It doesn't mean that when you become a Christ follower, mean people leave your life. It's like when you have Jesus inside, it's like a repellent to mean people, if only. If you can make that happen, that would be fantastic, that mean people would just repel away from us. But hey, this is for Christ followers and not Christ followers. How do we treat those who mistreat us? And if you find it easier to follow along by reading our notes, you can find them on the YouVersion Bible app. If you scan the QR code, it will take you to the YouVersion Bible app. All our notes are on there, and you can follow along and read through all the notes if that is easier for you to follow along with. But we started this story last week, and I'll bring you up to date, and we find it in 1 Samuel 25, 14 to 35. So this is where we're going to be parked today. But last week, we looked at the start of this story. So as we said, we've got the two main characters. We've got David and Nabal. And David's sort of famous. We know him. Nabal's just sort of one of those characters. He's there for a chapter. And we learn some things from him, but he's not there for the rest of the Bible. But David, you see his story throughout the Bible. And David is quite a popular guy. He killed Goliath when he was a teenager, killed this massive giant in front of the whole army. So he was celebrated in the country, and everyone knew of his name. And there was a prophet, and a prophet is someone who talks on God's behalf. And he said to David that you're going to be a future king. So Saul, the current king, got wind of this and was like, I'm going to keep my friends close, but my enemies closer. So I'm going to keep David nice and close, keep him in my palace, make sure that he's close to me so I know what's going on in his life. So David was being good and playing the harp for Saul and all these things. And then one day Saul got angry and tried to kill David. So he got David thrown out and he was trying to chase after David. So David became a fugitive. So before we know and hear of King David, we meet outlaw David. And David got kicked out of the palace, got kicked out of the town, and was just in the desert all by himself being chased by someone who wanted to kill him. So he's a fugitive and an outlaw. And as David was in the countryside, 600 more men, more outlaws joined with David. So now David's got this community going on of 600 people. And they're in this open plain, and they're not causing any trouble. And then we come and find out this character called Nabal. And he was described as mean Nabal. That's how they described him. So in history, and all throughout history, and when he was born, and then he lived. So from the day he died, and this story happened to now, he has been known as mean Nabal. Imagine that being your story. That, hey, it's mean Johnny or mean Sarah. Like, imagine being known. So it's written in Bible, in the history, that this guy is a mean fella. So that is his story. He is a mean guy. So David and his men come to him and say, hey, we've got a few guys coming. David might have played the king card, and hey, remember me? I killed Goliath and saved our country, and can you help me and feed my people? So Nabal responds and says, who's David? David who? I'm not helping David. Away on, go on, see you later. David got the answer, and he wasn't very happy about the answer. So this is, now we're up to speed. So David has just left, these men have just left, and David has found out the answer, and he's decided, okay, let's get 400 men to teach him a lesson. Let's get our swords, let's go to Nabal's house and teach him a lesson. So 400 out of 600 men are now on their way to Nabal's house. And this is where we meet Nabal's wife, Abigail, and she's the third main character of our story. And this is the start of this story for today, and it starts in verse 14. It says this, one of the servants told Abigail, Nabal's wife, David sent messengers from the wilderness to give our master his greetings, but he hurled insults at them. Yet these men were very good to us. They did not mistreat us. And the whole time we were out in the fields near them, nothing was missing. So the servant witnessed everything. Abigail had missed it also, saying, hey, David's men came and tried to greet our master, but he insulted them. He was mean and rude and insulted these guys. And I don't know why, because they were good to us, they didn't mistreat us, and they didn't steal anything. So I don't know why your husband responded like this. And she goes on to explain in verse 16, night and day they were a wall around us. So David's men protected these guys as well. They protected us, a whole wall around us, the whole time we were herding our sheep near them. Now think it over and see what you can do, because disaster is hanging over our master and his whole household. He is such a wicked man that no one can talk to him. So basically he's saying, hey, can you go off and think about it? Because if you don't do something, your mean, horrible, wicked man of a husband has just ruined it for us. Disaster is hanging over our head. David and his men are coming on their way to kill us. So it goes on to verse 18 and says, Abigail acted quickly. She took bread and wine and sheep and grain and raisins and cakes and put them on a donkey. Maybe you've ate from a food truck. This is like the first sort of food truck. They just loaded all this food on a donkey and sent the donkeys out to help feed David. So Abigail was like, okay, what can I do? He's asked for food, so let's try and feed these men. So loaded all the food on the donkey and said to her servant, go ahead, I'll follow you. But she did not tell her husband Nabal. So she's trying to sort this out without her wicked, stupid, mean husband ever finding out. Hopefully you don't have a husband who's stupid, mean, arrogant. No? Good. Don't put your hand up if you did anyway. So they're basically saying, hey, I'm not going to tell my husband because he's going to make things worse. So they've sent all these donkeys and they've left. But at this moment, David was on his way. David's on his way to their house. And I don't know if it's just me, but when you're in an angry situation and you're going somewhere and you're going to have a clarifying conversation with someone, you're driving and you're thinking, well, if they say this, I'm going to say that, and then I'll respond with this and I'll do that, and then if they do this, I'll do that. And you're just building up this anger inside you, thinking that they're going to respond with anger. So I'm going to respond with this, and if they ever say that, I'm going to say that. And I've got a good line, and I've crafted it in my head, and it's really smart, and I'm going to say it because I'm really angry. So David's riding his way here on his donkey, or whatever he's riding on his horse, and he's just bubbling with anger, getting ready to kill, steal, and destroy Nabal and everything that belongs to him. But then he gets into this open plain, and he sees these donkey food trucks coming, full of food, and this Abigail, who's described as a beautiful woman, there as well. So he's getting really angry, and then all of a sudden, he sees food trucks, he sees a beautiful woman, and he's a bit confused, like, what is going on here? So we read this moment of when Abigail and David met, and it says this, when Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey, bowed down before David with her face to the ground. She humbled herself, trying to calm David. But she also speaks to David as if he is already the man she hopes she will become. So she's speaking things to David that she hopes he will become. And this doesn't just work with David. I think this works with all men. And I think it still works today. Maybe your wife has said to you, hey, honey, you wash the car so well. And you're like, I do, yeah. And you know what she's hinting at? Hey, love, you're so patient with the kids. I think you're great. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, thank you. Oh, you're so good at planning. I can't wait to see what you've planned for my birthday. Oh, wait till you see what I've got planned. And I don't know why it works with all men. We know what you're doing. You're trying to get the car washed. You're trying to get the best out of us. But it works. I don't know if we're just simple, but if you just keep doing that, it will keep on working. So she speaks to David as if he is already the man she hopes she will become. So there is hope. If you have a man in your life who's a work in progress, just keep talking to him like you hope he will become. So this is how she speaks to David. So in verse 24 she says, she fell at his feet and said, pardon your servant, my Lord. Let me speak to you and hear what your servant has to say. At this moment, David could have just rode past in his horse, taken her head off. He didn't have to speak to her. If he wants to respond with meanness, because that's what Nabal done, he could have just looked through her, said, next please, just give me the next person, I'll chop their head off too. But she said, please listen, pardon your servant and hear what I have to say. So she says this in verse 25, pay no attention, my Lord, to that wicked, stupid, mean man that I call my husband Nabal. He is just like his name. His name means fool, and folly goes with him. And as for me, your servant, I did not see the man my Lord sent. So what she's saying is, hey, if I was there when your guys were here asking for food, I could have helped diffuse the situation. But I wasn't there. But if I was there, just don't pay attention to him. He's just a fella that lives in the house. Don't pay any attention to him. But if I was there, you should have went through me and I would have been able to help you. But then she goes on in verse 26, speaking to David's preferred future, and says this in verse 26. And now, my Lord, as surely as the Lord your God lives, and as you live, since the Lord has kept you from bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hands. And David's thinking, he has? Has the Lord kept me from bloodshed? And has the Lord stopped me from avenging myself? Abigail gives David credit for being better than he was about to be. So David was going in all guns blazing, ready to chop some heads off, ready to steal and kill everyone in sight. But Abigail gives David credit for being better than he was about to be. He was about to be the worst. But then Abigail says, isn't it amazing that God stopped you from killing everyone today? Isn't it amazing that you haven't got revenge today? And David's probably thinking, has God done that? And then she goes on and says, let this gift which your servant has brought my Lord be given to the men who follow you. And this just ruins David's plans completely. How can you be angry and upset and want to steal when it's just been given to you? He's been given all this food that he's asked for. And how can he still be angry when that is everything that he's asked for? So this gift has just ruined David's plan. Because David was planning to be angry and to kill. And then she goes on to say, the Lord your God will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my Lord because you fight the Lord's battles. Me? I fight the Lord's battles? I'm going to have a lasting dynasty. And she goes on and say, and no wrongdoing will be found in you as long as you live. And David's thinking, okay, I was about to do wrong, I was about to kill, I was about to respond evil for evil, but you're speaking and saying there'll be no wrongdoing in my life. She's responding good for evil. And then she says this to David, talking about his past, is saying, even though someone is pursuing you to take your life, the life of my Lord David will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God. And if you've read this like me, you've absolutely no idea what's going on. And maybe that's how you feel reading the Bible at times. What is that saying? So it's an old phrase basically saying, the Lord, David will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by God. What's it saying is it's like a wallet. It's like a woman's purse. The wallet is kept close. It's safe. The woman's bag's over the shoulder. It's their arm around it. It's tight into their bodies. It is safe. What she's saying is, you, David, will be safe with God. She's saying, hey, you will be safe. You will be hidden in him. He will be looking after you. So Abigail is speaking to David's past. He's saying, remember God's faithfulness. Remember God has been good to you. Hey, you're in God's wallet. He is keeping you safe. He is secure. He knows exactly where you are. So you don't need to get revenge today because God has fought all your battles. God has been faithful over the past. And she uses this imagery of a sling as well, and says in verse 29, but the lives of your enemies he will hurl away as from the pocket of a sling. And if you know the story of David and Goliath, David kills Goliath with a sling. So she's using this imagery of his past, maybe because he's still got Goliath's sword that he's carrying around, and that was the sword he was going to take everyone's head off with. But she's saying, hey, just like you had the sling, those enemies that you have, God will get rid of them for you. He will sling them, hurl them away. And you don't need to fight your own battles. That's the comfort that she's trying to say to David. You don't need to fight your own battles. And then Abigail speaks to David's future. So she said, hey, God has been faithful in the past. God is good. He fights your battles for you. But then she speaks to David's future. And basically she says this to David. David, what story do you want to tell when this is nothing but a story you tell? When you're a grandparent, you're sitting around the campfire and your grandkids say, hey, Granddad, how did you get to be king? What did you do? Tell us your life story. How did you make it to this point? So Abigail's saying, David, what story do you want to tell when this is no longer your current story, but just a story that you tell? Hey, what story do you want to tell today when you look back at your life? What story do you want to tell? And she's speaking to his future. She says this in verse 30. When the Lord has fulfilled for my Lord every good thing he promised concerning him, he is appointing him ruler over Israel. She's saying, hey, God has a promise and a purpose for your life, and he's going to fulfill every good thing and every promise he has for your life. And that is the same for you. God has a plan and a purpose for your life. Yes, you, not the person beside you, not the person in front of you. I'm talking to you. God has a plan and a purpose for your life. And maybe you don't want to give God control. But the beauty is God will fulfill every good thing he has planned for you. You just need to give him over control. And she goes on to speak about his future and says, my Lord, will you not have, my Lord David will not have this on his conscience, the staggering burden of needless bloodshed or of having avenged himself. So when this is just a story to tell, hey, wouldn't it be a better story if you didn't have this on your conscience? If you didn't have this staggering burden of having to prove yourself, having to respond evil for evil. And I don't know if you're here today and you've got something on your conscience, that you have a burden in your life, that you feel like God doesn't want anything to do with you. When we're talking about how God loves you and has a plan and a purpose for you, you've got something that you're holding back. You've got a burden. You've got something on your conscience. I did this. I responded that way. I've got a burden. Hey, there's this amazing passage in the Bible that says, give your burdens to God because he cares for you. He cares for you. So when you give your life to Jesus, you're giving him your life, and he'll give you life and life to the full. But what is on offer today also is freedom. You don't need to be walking around having something on your conscience, having a staggering burden on your life because of something that you've done in the past. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. We have freedom in Jesus' name. So I want to encourage you at the end of our service where we're going to hear about next steps. On our next steps cards, there's an opportunity today to accept Jesus into your life. When you accept Jesus, you don't just accept him as a friend, as a savior, and to start a relationship with him, but you also get that freedom. You can give him your burdens. You can give him whatever is on your conscience. And it tells us in this Bible that we can do that because he cares for us. So I want you to know that God cares for you today. He loves you and wants to know you today. So don't be walking around with a conscience and staggering burden today. And this is like David. Does David want to get to the end of his life and have this in his conscience? I'm sitting in this palace and I'm king and things are great. But in his head he's thinking, what about all those people that I killed? What about all those things that I stole? I've got this burden and I can't change it because now it's just a story that I tell. Abigail is saying, isn't this a better story? To give it to God, to let him fight your battles, to let him continue to be faithful. Isn't it a better story if we get to the end of our lives when this is just a story that we tell and that you didn't respond with evil, you didn't respond to mean people? Maybe that's a story that you want to tell. It's a better story. And David was taking all this in and he was perplexed and he was going into this situation ready to kill, steal, and destroy. And then he's met Abigail. And this is what David says. He said this to Abigail, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you today to meet me." It says, "May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed this day and from avenging myself with my own hands." Thank you for stopping me from doing this. He ends by saying, "I've heard your words and granted your request." If it wasn't for Abigail getting in at the right time, David would have had this on his conscience. He would have killed and would have got revenge. And a side point is this: we all need an Abigail in our lives. Is there someone that can speak wisdom over us? Is there someone that can calm us down in those moments? Is there someone that can direct us with wisdom? We all need an Abigail in our lives. Whether it's maybe you have someone like a parent, a boss, a colleague, a mentor, someone that you just do life with. But it's twofold. You might have someone who will give you the wisdom, but we all need to be wise enough to listen to these who speak to our preferred future. Hey, in the moment we might want something, but they're going to give you wisdom because they're outside of the circumstance and remind you of your preferred future. You don't want to ruin that relationship. You don't want the consequences of that. You don't want to do that. They're going to speak to you about our preferred future. We need those people who remind us that what we want immediately may rob us of what we want ultimately. Maybe you've done something in the moment immediately and it's robbed us of what we want ultimately. Maybe that's for you, and maybe that you've done something like this and that's why you're burdened. That's why you've got it in your conscience. You could be free today because God will take your burden away from you. But we know this. What feels right now may haunt us later. Maybe it is haunting you today, what you've done in the past. But through Jesus, there is freedom. And that is available for you today. So we see these three characters outplayed in this story. We have Nabal, we have David, and we have Abigail. And we see three ways that we can respond to mean people. So Nabal replied evil for good. So David's men were good to them, they protected them, they looked after them. So he responded with evil. And this next one is where we like to camp out and we like to live. David responded evil for evil. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. They did it to me, so they deserve the same thing back. And we sort of live sort of here. And sometimes we teach that to our kids, and we know that to be true ourselves, that if they do it to us, I'm going to do it to them. But Abigail chose a different way. She responded good for evil. David was angry, on his way, ready to kill, ready to be mean right back, but she responded with goodness. Hey, we know Nabal was a maniac. He was mad. So if you live in this column, you're mental. When people are good to you and you respond with evil, but hey, we have bad days too. Maybe you've responded evil for good. When you've come in from work and someone at home's made you a lovely meal and you sit down and you don't even say thank you and you're not grateful and you leave your shoes at the door and your coat at the door. We can do that too. But if you live in a constant state of that, you're a maniac in the most loving way possible. But hey, what about David? David's predictable. If we live in this evil for evil, that makes sense to most of us. Hey, if someone does it to you, I'm going to do it to them. And it's predictable. Or there's a third option, to be remarkable. To live like Abigail lived and to be remarkable. Hey, if you're not a Christ follower in here, you can choose. You are the sailor of your own ship. You get to choose the way that you have your own life. So you can choose to repay evil for good, or good for evil. But hey, if you're a Christ follower in this room, we only really have one option, and that's to be remarkable. That's to repay good for evil. And why is that our only option? Because we have had this model to us. That Jesus, when we were evil, when we were far away, when we mocked him, when we cursed him, he responded with good. Isn't that amazing? And as Christ followers, we want to emulate God. We want to be like him. So we only have one choice, and that's to make a remarkable story and repay good for evil. And we know that in this story, there's Nabal and David and Abigail. And Abigail is amazing, and she responds good for evil. But we don't want to focus on amazing Abigail. We want to focus on amazing grace. God has given us amazing grace. What is grace? Grace is unmerited favor, receiving something that we can't earn, that doesn't belong to us, that we're not worthy of. We have received amazing grace. And you can receive grace today as well. Maybe you grew up singing this old hymn, Amazing Grace. How sweet the sound that saved a wretch, a mean person like me. I was once lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. And that is the story of amazing grace. We were lost, and now we're found. He took someone mean and horrible and repaid evil for good. Like Nabal, and Nabal's, he lives in us sometimes, and that comes out, our get even standard comes out. But there's grace, amazing grace for you today. So the question we ask today is, how do we treat those that mistreat us? Those people that respond with evil, even when we're good to them. How do we respond? There's the two standards. There's our get even standard. A bit like Nabal and a bit like David. This is what it would look like. To hate your enemies. Yeah, makes sense. They're an enemy. Do evil to those that hate you. Yeah, I have no issue with that. They hate me, so I'm going to do evil. Curse those that curse you. An eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, yeah. Mistreat those that mistreat you. That's our get even standard. Sounds a lot like Nabal and David. But as Abigail modeled in this story, and as we see from Jesus' gold standard, this is what Jesus said in Luke 6. He said, love your enemies. He said, be good, do good to those that hate you. Bless those that curse you, and pray for those that mistreat you. And we're all on a faith journey. Whether you have faith today or not, we were all at that stage where we didn't have faith and we didn't want anything to do with God. And maybe we were God's enemy. We wanted nothing to do with Him. We were on the other side, on the other team. Maybe you hate God. Maybe you hated God. Maybe you curse God. Maybe you mistreat God. But God responds to us with amazing grace. And He loves us. He does good for us. He blesses us. And He speaks to us. And we're going to dive into more of this next week. How do we love our enemies? How do we do good? How do we bless and how do we pray for those that mistreat us? And we're going to get some practical application for that next week. But the question I want to leave you with is, what would it look like to return good for evil? When someone's mean to you, what would it look like to return good? Like Abigail, like Jesus' gold standard. Would it change the atmosphere in your family? Would it bring unity where there was once disunity? Would it make your workplace the best place to work? Would it bring your friends closer if we responded good for evil? And evil's going to come, and meanness is going to come, and struggles are going to come. But how will you respond? I want to challenge you today. Let's not write a predictable story. Let's write a remarkable one. Let's not be predictable and get to the end of our life and say, yeah, I did this. And this person did this, so this is how I responded. But actually, we have the opportunity to write a remarkable story. The story of amazing grace that saved a wretch, a down and out, a mean person like me. We were once lost, but now found. Blind, but now I see. That's a remarkable story. When we respond with love, we respond with goodness.